We've got an interview with two wonderful people. Got my good friend Reagan Crawford and Terry Baxter from GoServ Global. And the GG gets my tongue all twisted up. And today we're going to be talking about missions. We're going to be talking about what does it mean to be a missionary, culture, the dangers of sometimes evangelism. What does it mean to actually be a disciple? We got a wide range of topics. Excited for you guys to join us. Well, hey, good morning, guys.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
Good morning.
All right. So this started, and I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself. So Reagan, I work with your husband, Derek.
Yes. Yep.
Derek is our executive pastor, so he's part of our executive team. And probably a month and a half ago, you were like, hey, was it that long? Well, let's see. Yeah, probably about a month and a half ago. You were like, hey, I'd love to have a conversation. It was based on a sermon that I did a month and a half ago.
Yeah. You're stretching my memory there, but I think you did the Invest Like It Matters sermon, and you were just talking to us about how can we be serving and giving for like the eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
I think is kind of what the gist was.
Yeah, well, and I actually remember, so we did a whole series called Like It Matters, and it was things that as Christians that matter to God, and therefore they should matter to us. If you're a follower of Jesus, there are things that if we say Jesus is king, if they matter to King Jesus, they absolutely should matter to us. Mm-hmm. And how often we forget that. Mm-hmm. And we forget why they're important. And this particular message, so often we talk about generosity. And yes, God wants us to be generous because he's a generous God. But that particular message, we looked at it less from the lens of generosity or philanthropy or trying to be a good person, and more of investment. Mm-hmm. And really it's us investing in what God is doing in the kingdom. And the challenge we gave is, instead of volunteering for things, what if you looked at the things that God is asking you to do? So in a church, instead of volunteering for kids ministry, I'm investing in my children. I'm investing in future generations that they might know Jesus and the gospel. Instead of volunteering for worship and sound, I'm investing in helping so that other people can connect and worship Jesus. And then we talked about missions and realizing that the things that we do have an eternal consequence. So that was the message, and that's what sparked this.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I know that you work for an organization called GoServ.
GoServ Global. Yep.
GoServ Global. Tell a little bit more about that. Oh, actually, before that,
let's introduce him.
Yeah. So you all know me. This is the problem when you already know somebody, you just start going.
And I'm Reagan Crawford. For those of you who don't know, like you mentioned, I'm married to Derek Crawford, our executive pastor here.
And what do you do for GoServ Global?
I am the communications director at GoServ Global.
That's why you asked if we could do this.
Yes. Yep.
Hey,
love communicating.
All right, and then we got another guest here, which we've only met like once or twice. I know about you, and you've actually done some things at Zion, but I've never had the privilege of actually listening to you teach or preach or anything like that, but I know of you.
Well, good. Thank you. My name's Terry Baxter. I'm one of the two co-founders of GoServ Global.
Okay.
I've been in ministry for a number of years, and now I do a lot of traveling and speaking at conferences across the United States and around the world.
Awesome.
I just love sharing Jesus and ministering to people.
Awesome. And how long ago did GoServ Global start?
We started as a result of the big earthquake in Haiti that was in 2010. And so we've been going about 14 years, basically.
Okay. So interesting connection. A former student of mine who was in nursing school was on a missions trip during that earthquake. And so they were on a bus. And when you're driving on a bus, you can't feel an earthquake. Most people don't know that. When you're in a vehicle, if the vehicle's traveling, you can't tell if there's an earthquake unless it's so dramatic you're falling into something. But she was one of the first responders, I think, in the major city because they just happened to be right there. And she was like a second-year nursing student.
Wow.
And so she got thrown into the fire right away. And I remember her sharing her story with that. So GoServ Global then started as a result of the stuff going on in Haiti with the earthquake, which Haiti has had a lot of stuff going on.
A lot of trauma right now.
A lot of trauma. Megan this past Sunday actually shared a letter she received from a Haitian pastor. And again, anybody who's watching, this is a very conversation. So if you've never watched Jaden and I do the podcast, sometimes we'll come in with an agenda, but 90% of the time, even if we start with an agenda, it usually goes someplace else. And so the approach to this, so you know what the heart of this podcast is. It started originally it started with another one called the Breakthrough Breakdown. And the point of the was really to bring together a group of, we were 4 of us, and we would process through the sermons. And then we stopped it for about 6 months and just kind of rebranded, rethought stuff. And really what we're looking at now is, how do we encourage everyday Christians to follow Jesus? And so every once in a while, yeah, we'll still talk about the messages, that kind of stuff. But we have people who watch that don't go to our church, don't know the message, and think of it almost like a daily, not a daily, but a coaching of faith. Like, how can we encourage people to follow Jesus in everyday life? That's why it's far more conversational than it is, here's the topic. So I'd love to hear, are you in other countries besides Haiti, or is Haiti the primary focus?
We are. Prior to the starting of GoServ Global, I was working with International Messengers. It's based
Okay.
here in Clear Lake.
Yeah.
So I was with them for 18 years. We did a lot of work in Eastern Europe, and then started some work in India. We'd started some work in Peru, South America. When GoServ Global started, we inherited a couple of those works. The work
Okay.
in India came under GoServ Global. The work down in Peru, South America was a joint relationship with International Messengers and GoServ Global at that point. We're also in Guatemala.
Okay.
We're right now starting a lot of work in Africa.
Okay.
As Haiti is having some struggles, Africa is very open. The safety home that we do with Sukup Manufacturing, and many
Yeah.
people have seen that. Ironically, we've discovered it's uniquely built to fit really well in what we call birthing centers
Yeah.
that can go out across rural Africa where there's no medical access. And we're anticipating God to use that in some really neat ways. So in 2024, we're looking at building 2 of those in Africa as well.
Oh,
We
wow.
do orphanages, Christian schools, and churches, and so that's kind of the broad scope in a number of countries.
So I went on a dental mission trip. So my wife works for a local dentist who, they have an orphanage
Mhm.
that they sponsor, and then they would go and do dental work. And we actually went and saw one of the Sukup things
Sure.
that was just, I think it had just been finished that year.
Sure.
And they're phenomenal. I'll see if maybe Jaden, if you can find a picture or something so people can see it and we can add it to the podcast. So then, Reagan, what got you involved? Because how long have you been on staff, and what led you to want to be a part of what's going on with GoServ Global?
So I actually got involved technically back in 2017 when Zion did a mission trip with GoServ Global to Peru, and that was my first international mission trip, and it just had a huge impact on me, and so it got me signed up for their newsletters. And about 2 years ago now,
Has it been 2 years already?
2 years ago
Jesus.
now, I got an email about the position at GoServ Global, and God just kind of moved and worked and led me to where I am now. So
So in the stuff with missions, okay, so your daughter is also, she's a pastor in Peru, which we have, that's a partner church that we
Sure.
worked with. And so her and her husband, they started the church Genesis, right?
They did. The Genesis Church started in their living room with 6 people.
Okay, what is it at right now?
Well, altogether with the services, it's putting close to 1,000.
That's amazing.
So it's a lot of facility. And I have a second daughter down there that has a work called Lifeline right in
didn't know
Iquitos
that.
as well. So
Okay.
she's
And-
married to a Peruvian, and that's pretty exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. And you, where do you live, or where did they grow up around here? 'Cause I know
They grew up in our home right here in rural Hancock County between
Okay.
Forest City and Clear Lake and Garner.
Okay, so it's interesting because okay, so funny story. I grew up close to Mexico, so I grew up in San Diego.
Oh,
So you'd think I know some Spanish. I don't. And for the longest time, because the first time Genesis was introduced to me was Genesis Nuevo, so I thought that was its name. So from the stage, every time I talk about Genesis, I'd say Genesis Nuevo. And finally, I think it was you or Megan was like, "It's just Genesis." I'm like, "What?" You keep on saying Genesis Nuevo, which is new. It's not New Genesis. It's just Genesis. And so I was calling it the wrong name for a long time. So family-wise, it sounds like your family has a real heart for missions.
God has really blessed our family. He blessed us with 9 children. We lost our youngest to
Oh.
trisomy 13. But of our 8 children that we've raised, 7 of them are in ministry,
Wow.
missions, youth pastor wives, and that kind of thing. We have a passion for world evangelization and missions
Wow.
and ministry in general.
Yeah. Did you were you raised in a mission or a mission-oriented home, or what's the faith journey for
I
you?
was raised in a pagan home,
Okay.
non-Christian home. I accepted Jesus at age 16, and right away, God put in my heart a passion to share with others what God has done in my life, and took off, ended up going to Bible college, and then getting into pastoral work, but very early doing church renewals and evangelistic crusades, and launched right into the heart of reaching people for Jesus.
Oh, wow. So when when you started in ministry, did you always know missions was kind of the focus, or was that later on? I mean, because obviously doing evangelistic crusades and that kind of stuff, that's very mission oriented, but that seems more local mission.
Right.
Or were these evangelistic crusades in other countries? What was going
My
on there?
passion has always been world evangelization rather than just mission.
Okay, so it's
And
always been thinking globally.
it's been globally. I've
Okay.
had a global vision for years, and I'll never forget the first time I was able to fly over the big pond, and a day and a half later be doing ministry in Eastern Europe. It was
Wow.
like the whole immensity of the world came crashing down, and it was doable.
Wow.
The whole world is within our reach today, and that's one of
Yeah.
the exciting things about the times we're living in.
So when we look at the conversation of investment, and so after Easter, we're going to be doing a series called Heaven and Hell and everything in between, talking about the afterlife. But one of the things that we often don't think about, because I mean, the only world we know is the one we live in. It's hard to fathom that there is something after this and to have that in our mindset. My youth pastor years ago gave me an acronym, whatever one it is that uses the letters. And he used the verbiage of alive. And I still remember this. This is 30 plus years later, always living in view of eternity.
Mm.
And I remember the challenge that he gave us. And again, I think I was 15 at the time. That was 33 years ago. Wow, I'm old. It's a long time ago.
Make sure you keep that in there.
Oh,
Youngsters,
33 years ago. Holy cow. Because he left when I was 16 to go be youth pastor in another church. That's how I know the time frame of it. But he really, it was a Baptist church that I got saved in, which Baptists are very well known for evangelism. That's very important to the Baptist faith or tradition in the denomination. But realizing that when we do evangelism, it is not just about saving people from hell. It's actually bringing the kingdom of heaven into the earth now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we miss that so often when we think, and again, I got saved because I didn't want to go to hell. Like that was the reason my youth pastor said, "Who wants Jesus? Raise your hand." My hand went up in the air because ultimately the fear was, I don't want to go to hell. And if that's the only view of Christianity that you have, that you're saving people for the afterlife, don't get me wrong, that's very important, but it's more than that. And I think if what I understand of GoServ Global, it is not just about getting people saved. It's about bringing God's will in heaven here on earth, and coming into cultures and coming alongside, not making them American. I think that's another concern we have as American Christians. We think the goal is to bring American Christianity to where everybody else is, and that's probably, well, let's be honest, American Christianity isn't God's Christianity. It's an American form of what we think the gospel is, right? How has, as you look at the language of investment and for GoServ Global, how do you be the gospel with the view of eternity in mind, if that makes sense? So knowing that, no, there is eternal impact that goes on. How do you be the gospel in communities? And you talked about the birthing centers. I think that kind of gives a clue.
Sure.
What does that look like for evangelism, but more importantly, for doing the gospel work with the lens of eternity in mind?
One of the early ministries I made to India, I met a pastor over there that had written a book, The Role of the Gospel in Nation Building.
Okay.
And they looked beyond just the idea of spreading Christianity to turn people into Christians. They were to be world changers.
Yeah.
They're to be involved in building community from the ground up. One of the other things that we've made a value of GoServ Global is not just sending Westerners to be full-time missionaries to lord it over other countries. Rather, we try to equip and train nationals to reach and care for their own people. And we believe if we can raise them up, help them in the areas that they need encouragement, they'll do a lot better job of reaching their own people. They know the culture, they know everything, and then get involved in really changing that culture, that country, to bring the kingdom presence into it, which is really exciting.
And I think what's interesting is that for our people who are watching, there's a term called colonialism, which is where, and we saw this when the English and the Spaniards and all those came over to America. They tried to convert the natives, the Native American Indians or Native Americans, and they tried to get rid of their language. They tried to enculturate them into English or a Western mentality. And the damage that caused to the culture we're still feeling it today. And colonialization was the model that, I'll be honest, when I was in high school, that was still the model that existed even in the 80s and 90s, was these other countries aren't doing it right. we in America have it figured out because we're first world. So let's go. And I think it was always well intentioned, but the mentality was we need to come and rescue them from their third world culture and from their culture to be more like ours. And I'll say, I think America needs Jesus more than most of our third world countries do. um, when you come in and I think things like World Vision, organizations like World Vision now, Compassion, which we're partnering with Compassion. We have a Compassion Sunday coming up, actually this coming Sunday. Yeah, that's coming up. I'm trying to think about when this will be released. So more and more organizations are realizing the goal is to work with the existing culture. It is not to change their culture, but to redeem their culture. What is redemption? What does a redemptive culture look like through the lens of GoServ? Like, what does that look like to see the redemption of the gospel move into a culture?
Let me share a quick story that happened in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of going over there and doing ministry in a city called Hai Phong. It's a city of about 7 million with about 2,000 Christians. And if you know anything about Vietnam, it was a Christian Missionary Alliance church that really started a ministry there. And my first Sunday there, I had the opportunity to go and visit a church, and it was a Western church. It looked like it came right from the streets of America. It
Yeah.
had pews set up. The front was the same, organ, the service order was the same. And I was teaching pastors in the underground church, also pastors from the registered church. And partway into it, I asked the question. I said, what does a Vietnamese church look like? I know what an American church looks like,
Yeah.
but why would a Vietnamese person, having had a war with America, want to go to an
Yeah.
American church in Vietnam?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And as I opened that question, first of all, they're real cautious. You know, can they really talk openly? And all of a sudden, a conversation ensued for about 45 minutes where they realized that they were being empowered to start a uniquely Vietnamese church. And we try to do that in every country where we go. We want to see that indigenous church get going. One of our challenges down in Peru early on, you mentioned Nelton and our daughter Bethany. Nelton was working for a couple of American missionaries, and he basically became their servant. He was just there to be their go-to person to do this and that while they were lording it over the people and trying to start an American ministry. When he got involved with us, one of the first things I had to do to Nelton is say, "You're the leader." Not the Americans that come down. They're here to serve you. You are the leader. Now do a Peruvian ministry.
Yeah.
And I was very careful as father-in-law and whatnot to get out of their way,
Yeah.
to step back and let a uniquely Peruvian ministry take off. The results have been explosive. And that's one of the reasons why my value system in missions is not to send Westerners to start a Western church or ministry. We shoot ourselves in the foot. We've seen in country after country as the doors have closed to Western missionaries, only those groups that empowered the nationals to do a
Yeah.
ministry are left standing at the end of the day.
Well, and I think this, and Reagan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I think this is part of the problem is that we'll come in, and if we don't give them a voice and let it be their church, it's really still our church. It's not their church, right? And I think what's interesting is that, because we now have, between technology, social media, and everything else, there's influences that are now coming over. I mean, I was just on, I think it was TikTok or Facebook, and I had ads. I had TikToks that were coming from Vietnam. Now we had some Vietnamese students. We had a Vietnamese student and 2 Chinese students live with us when we lived in San Jose. I call him my Vietnamese son. His name is Vin. I miss Vin. And so there's going to be some things where culturally we're going to see that meshing because we're a globalized world now.
Sure.
Right? There's no longer a distance between where, if news happened, it would be sometimes days before we found about it. We find about it instantly. So there's crossover. How can we learn from these other cultures? Maybe should, I don't want to say influence, but help us think through the gospel in a different lens. Because I think part of the power of the gospel is that different cultures understand what the good news is for them. Now, we have the truth of the good news that Jesus Christ died on the cross, that, the things that we understand are worldwide. Jesus is Lord Savior. But then the hope of the gospel, I think that has cultural power.
Mm.
I think that what is good news for somebody in Korea may not sound like good news for someone in America, apart from the Jesus dying for our sins, that kind of stuff. What can we learn from places like Peru or Africa when it comes to understanding the hope of the gospel? What are some of the things? And the reason why I want to know yours, I mean, you're part of this I mean, this is you. It brought you to this organization for a reason. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what can we as an American church, who sometimes think we've got it figured out, and I think our statistics are showing we don't, because the fastest growing churches in the world are not American.
Mhm. One of the amazing things about my early trips to India is discovering that the Indian Christian movement is still under Hindu culture,
Yeah,
meaning they still practice arranged marriages.
yeah,
They do a lot of things over there that are very different from the Western church. And as I went over to do pastors' conferences, one of the initial concerns was, let's contextualize this to Indian culture. We don't want to change culture. We want to bring the gospel into culture. And I think we fail to realize many times as Western Christians that the gospel message is the same.
that's
It's
right.
unalterable. The word of God's the same. But when it comes to culture, the Bible does not have specifically what would be called a Christian culture.
That's right.
For example, we don't have a pattern of what a Christian wedding looks like.
That's right.
It can be culturalized,
Yeah.
it can be according to their culture. We don't have a lot of examples of even what a Christian worship service looks
Yeah.
like. Why is that? I believe it was because the gospel can adapt to any culture, and within that culture become uniquely whatever that culture happens to be, and adapt to it.
The message of the gospel doesn't change, but how we do the gospel should.
Methodology.
Methodology, that's right. And I think that's part of the problem that happens so often is we think that there are things that are prescribed that are really descriptive. They're not prescriptive in the Bible. They're descriptive, and we'll bring that in, and then all of a sudden we hold on to those things. And think about even how much church has changed in the last 50 years from where it was 100 years ago. And so, when I think we look at that, what I'm hearing you say is maybe one of the things that we can learn as Christians from seeing the gospel move in other areas is we need to hold the methodology maybe a little bit more loosely. Instead of holding on to so tightly, no, this is how you do it, and allow churches, whether they be in the United States, because let's be honest, a Southern church is way different than a Midwestern church. Right? I went to Hope Des Moines this past Sunday, and I discovered it must be a Lutheran thing. So their sanctuary, I think, holds 2,500 people, and the worship band was amazing, but it was worshipful. And I'm charismatic. I describe it as charismatic with a seatbelt. So I believe in all the gifts. And for me, raising hands, I was a worship leader in the Vineyard
Movement.
Charismatic church, right? And I look around, and 99.9% of the people are worshiping just like the people at Zion.
Mhm.
Where, like, if it says raise their hand, maybe they'll do this. And then I look over, maybe there was like one person way over, probably 700 seats over. One person had their hand raised. I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm all in, right? And it's interesting because coming from a charismatic background, coming from the West Coast, coming to the Midwest, and seeing people who aren't raising their hands in a Lutheran church, it's easy for me to get judgmental and go, oh, well, they're not doing it right. and I think, I watched a clip from Lucas. It was one of the music video things that they were doing. Lucas, who's grew up at Zion, is now a missionary over there, and we support him and work with him. Amazing singer. But just watching how active and the way they worship is so much more expressive than us.
Animated.
Very animated.
They get into it.
They get into it, right? But are there other aspects of how the gospel affects culture for them? What does it look like to be the hands and feet of Jesus? Because this goes back to the investment stuff. Again, I got saved where the goal was so that I wouldn't go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so that I would go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus and bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. What does that look like? And again, if you have anything to share, please do. I think that why this is important, and the people who are watching this or listening, I think sometimes we get stuck in our head that the only missions that exist are global missions, when all of us are missionaries. Every single person, every single Christian is a missionary. The question is, have you bought into the mission yet? And then what does it actually look like to be that? So this is a very relevant conversation, not just informational about GoServ, because I think it also helps us, how do we bring the gospel into the workplace?
Exactly. One of the things that we believe and we've watched happen, that the importance of a short-term missions trip is to get Westerners out of their comfort zone, put them in a third world context where they see things they've never seen, hear things they've never heard, smell things they've never smelled, maybe touch things they've never touched, maybe for the first time experience poverty and the pain of poverty.
Yeah.
and yet discover that in that context, people that know Jesus can be happy.
Yeah.
They can really love the Lord. They can express that in unique ways. I've had the privilege of working over 25 countries around the world, and I've been at wedding services, I've been at worship services that are very different than American services. Just came back from Africa and had the opportunity up in Ethiopia of working with a charismatic Lutheran denomination. They're seeing signs and wonders
Yep.
today, amazing things happening.
Charismatic renewal movement in the Lutheran Church in the 70s was a huge thing.
I had the
Yeah.
opportunity to go through some church services there and whatnot, but we were able to meet with their international missions director and hearing what God is doing. They've got 6.5 million people that have come to Christ, and right now there are over 600,000 a year coming to Christ. And as a result of that, they're spreading Islamic countries very quickly.
Yeah.
And to me, the idea of seeing Muslims come to Christ in huge numbers was new to my Western mindset.
Yeah.
I had this kind of wall in my mind that Muslims are really unreachable. They're people just like you and
Yeah.
me, searching and seeking with struggles in their life, and Jesus Christ wants to reach them as well.
Yeah. So when we first moved to Minnesota, we rented a townhouse from a guy named Sikander Nerudin. Excuse me. Still dealing with some of this crud that I've had for the
It'll
last
be
few
edited
months.
out, don't worry.
Or he'll keep it in just because it makes it real, right? So Sikander and his wife, it was an arranged marriage. She didn't drive. She could. He drove everywhere. And Muslim. And one of the most kind and gentle people, which is, again, went squarely against my understanding of Muslims, right? And in fact, if you go up to my office, I have a Quran that his mother gave him. And he gave it to me as a gift because we started talking about faith. And he would always, every time we get in a phone conversation, he would end it with, "Oh, and Jason, one more thing." and what was supposed to be a 5-minute conversation always ended up being a 20 because he always had one more thing that he wanted to talk about. But I remember, and this goes kind of what you're talking about, we had moved out of that townhouse, I don't know, it's been a year or so, and he called me. And he was in IT, and he started attending a Bible study at his workplace. And the thing that intrigued him was the Book of Psalms.
Wow.
And I found out later, I had a friend of mine who was really, that was his primary mission field, was Muslims. And he said the Psalms is usually the greatest bridge to connect with people who are Muslim. And talking with him, and Sikander and I had probably 3 or 4 different conversations where he was wrestling through and actually finding a lot of beauty and comfort in the Bible. Very open. But if I just came at him through my typical Western approach, let me walk you through the Romans road.
Tell you how to change your life.
Yeah. And there's a bridge, and use language that he didn't understand, right? Or language that made sense to me, that maybe connected with me, and all these things are good tools. But I tried to. Actually, the first several conversations we had about Jesus was me using a Western approach to try and get him to believe through an apologetic.
Yeah.
Really was my approach is, let me show you why you're wrong and I'm right.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think we have to force a need for Jesus on people. Like, I think we can get uneducated about what evangelism is, where instead of recognizing everybody does need Jesus, we don't have to make them know that,
Yeah.
but through relationship and just sharing, being who God made you to be, being showing the fruits of the Spirit, they'll start to recognize it on their own.
Yeah.
That stirring happens through the Spirit. I just as we were talking to, I think one of the things that most drew me to want to serve in GoServ Global is even going back to my mission trip. One of the things I loved most was an outreach event we did, and just getting to go out and serve people and realizing it doesn't have to be this big intimidating, which for me, I'm not a small talker. I don't strike up conversation the best. So it's intimidating sometimes to think, oh, I have to go and figure out how to work into a conversation. Hey, do you know Jesus?
That's not awkward at all.
And for me, that was a big growth area because I was never really trained in it. And so it was something that when I went on this mission trip, I came back and I was really on fire to want to get more comfortable with this because it's so vital. And I think sometimes we can ignore it because we're not sure what to do with this whole evangelism aspect of Christianity. The Great Commission sounds great when you say it like that, but when you realize oh no, I have to open up with other people and try and learn something new because it's a skill set. It's not just it happens it just magically happens. It's a skill set you have to work on. For some people, I know other people, maybe it's just their first
That's the gift of
prerogative, but
evangelism.
Well, you're touching on something very important because ministry, according to Jesus, was highly relational
Highly.
Mhm.
and highly spontaneous.
Yes.
yes,
It's really hard to go through the four gospels and seeing Jesus do one method every time.
Oh, it's
He was
almost-
very flexible.
Yeah.
The Spirit of
Yeah.
God was
yeah,
leading him. He was very spontaneous. And we've discovered that missions has to be highly relational.
yes,
And there are a lot of American Christians are kind of in the culture of the church, and they think church is for Sunday morning or Wednesday night, and the rest of the week is something different. It has to be integrated into your entire life, and Jesus has to be a spontaneous part of you.
Yeah.
One of the things we've discovered is the value of short-term missions trips. When people go to another culture, and you got like 240 hours in 2 weeks of relational connection with people,
Mhm.
many of whom you don't even share the same language with.
Yeah.
And yet you find a way to bridge the language barrier, forge a relationship, you become friends, and lo and behold, there's something about friendship.
Yeah.
Yep.